Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about some of the books that I have read most recently. It's not really a July wrap up per se because some of these books are books that I read just at the end of June, but you know, just a little bit of a collection of books that I've read since last time we spoke. I'm currently filming this on one of the hottest days of the year. It is the 18th of July and we are experiencing a very unprecedented hot spell. The UK is currently experiencing temperatures in like the mid to late 30s and maybe even possibly reaching 40 degrees Celsius, which is not typical for us at all. So it's a bit hot, it's a bit hot. And my room takes a lot of the sun, so it is quite warm in here. So I'm going to be trying as best as I can to blitz through these books. I apologise, but I think if you've been through this, you understand. First book I have to show you today is Dress Like a Woman, Working Women and What They Wore. This is largely a book told in beautiful, beautiful photographs, though with a foreword by Roxane Gay and an introduction by Vanesa Friedman. And it basically just illustrates lots of different working women, their professions and what it is that they wore to work. And I wanted to say a big thank you to Rosie over at Sparkles Books for gifting this to me for my birthday. This book was actually inspired by some of Donald Trump's remarks that he preferred the women in his administration to dress like real women. And this is kind of a response to that. It's basically compiling all sorts of professional women from the past 150 years, women from all walks of life, from all different countries, and what they wore to work. And it's basically just to demonstrate how dressing like a woman for work means wearing what that woman is comfortable in, what will make work practical for her and what will make her feel good at any time in any place. I love this book because it shows the vast and diverse array of women's life experiences, not just with work but with life itself. There is not just one way to dress like a woman, and there is also not just one way to be a woman either. I think there's definitely an argument that could be made that it would have been good to get a little bit more text in here, more explanation for things like what textiles were used for this particular piece of clothing and this particular profession and why that is particularly helpful. But I don't really think that this book set out to be that kind of dress history. It's intended just to be very snappy and very easily demonstrative, something that is easy to access and very easy to quickly point at something and say, look, here we go, here is the photographic evidence for what women wore. I think it also would have been quite nice to get some more trans women representation in here. There is one photo of Janet Mock at the Women's March, but that is pretty much it in terms of trans women, and you know, it just would have been nice to get more. You know, with this book being about women's experiences and how women's experiences are very different, there isn't just one way to be a woman at work and there isn't just one way to be a woman, you know, that would have been a nice little nod. But otherwise I do really love the diversity that is reflected in these photographs. The photos in here are just stunning and so high quality, and yeah, I just think this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Next up we have The Case of the Married Woman, a 19th century heroine who wanted justice for women by Antonia Fraser. This book is all about the case of Caroline Norton. Caroline Norton, who was married to George Norton, a very prominent MP whose private life ended up being splashed everywhere due to a very infamous trial that George Norton, her husband, brought against Lord Melbourne, with whom Caroline had been rumoured to be having an affair with. Despite the fact that Lord Melbourne was actually acquitted through this trial, George Norton still decided that he was going to legally deny Caroline access to her 3 children. And Caroline's response to this was basically, no, I am not having that. And so she campaigned very, very tirelessly for a woman's right to custody, because this was back at a point in history where if a man decided that his wife could no longer have access to his children, he could actually legally carry that out. A woman was seen to have absolutely no rights to her children. Children were seen as solely the property of the husband. This was a case that actually was brought up quite a lot when I was learning about women's suffrage, but it was really nice to come back to this story and get to hear a bit more of the complexities with this trial and with this campaign. Something that I really loved about this is that there are occasional moments where Antonia Fraser will kind of zoom out and she'll give a lot of context, particularly literary context, for what is happening in the day and the time that she's referencing. This is particularly relevant because Caroline was a writer herself, but I also think it is really nice and helpful for grounding you in the time period, especially for those of us who love reading. You know, being able to hear how Caroline Norton was friends with Mary Shelley, how Charles Dickens was in attendance at her trial, later hearing about how impressed Caroline Norton was with Jane Eyre and also with Middlemarch. There's later these suggestions that books such as Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte may have been inspired by Caroline Norton's story. And I don't know, those are just little touches that made this feel just bit more grounded, more real to me, even though, you know, I know it's a real thing, but being able to link it back to something that I know very well was really nice. Next up, another history that I read, one that I've been reading for quite some time, and I was quite pleased to actually finish this. Not because it was a bad book, it was a very, very good book, but this was one that I had to sit with for quite a while, and it did take a lot of brain space, so it's kind of nice to be a little bit out of it, because it does get very deep and very dark and very traumatic at points, and that book is Black and British, A Forgotten History by David Olusoga. This is just one of those landmark history books that I've been wanting to get to for such a long time, and I'm really, really glad that I did. This was absolutely brilliant, but as I say, it's one that, you know, you get your head stuck into, and it's like, because as you can probably tell by the subject matter, we're obviously dealing with a lot of things like slavery and institutional racism, and if it's bad to read, I can only imagine how it felt to actually have to live through this, because that being said, even though I did have to work through this very, very slowly, even though it is one that, you know, just kind of takes over your life whilst you're reading it, it is one that I do want to go back to and reread at some point. I think this is one of those books where I would actually recommend, like, read a chapter and then go back and read it again, that you should really mull over this book. It's a book that is all about the evidence for the long-ranging roots of Black people living in Britain, whether that was through immigration, whether that was through trade, whether that was through slavery. Evidence for this stretching particularly back to Roman Britain, because there is this wide-held notion, particularly within certain generations of the UK, that Black people pretty much just popped up during Windrush, and before then it was white people for as far as the eye can see, which is not true. I think also people get this idea because there is a lot of like isolationist rhetoric, this like British exceptionalism that is very much baked into a lot of education, whereas this just really opens up actually how interlinked, especially through trade, Britain was with the rest of the world. It feels stupid to have to kind of explain it like that out loud, but like this is what a lot of people think, that Britain was just kind of existing for centuries on its own, not really referring to other countries, and it's like, no, that is not true. There are a lot of medieval historians who have a bone to pick with you about that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like I can do this book justice. Just definitely read it. It's one that I think should be on everybody's life TBR. And I would just say don't rush through this. Like, give yourself plenty of time. If it's one that you have to dip in and out of over the span of a few months, then definitely do that. But it's just really crucial, essential reading, and I think it's great. Next up, we have The Last Days of Troy by Simon Armitage. Simon Armitage is most well known for his poetry, and this was actually stored under poetry, but I would argue that this is more written like a play, and it is an adaptation of the Iliad, and as the title suggests, the last days of the Trojan War. I've also picked up Simon Armitage's adaptation of the Odyssey, and I do intend to get to that very, very soon because I really enjoyed this. This, as I say, is told more like a play than it is traditional poetry. This is one that is very much modernized. There is a lot of colloquial language in here, which I think some people will love and some people will hate. I don't think the colloquial language is quite as strong as in something like Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls, but it is definitely there. I feel like the humour in this is really played up, especially when it comes to highlighting the pettiness of the gods, which I always think is welcome. I actually shared one of my favourite moments in this, which is actually from the second scene, which is Odysseus entering Agamemnon's tent, and Agamemnon says, "Say something positive or say nothing at all," and then Odysseus doesn't respond, to which Agamemnon just says, "Speak!" which I just found really funny. For those of you wondering, for all of you Song of Achilles fans, Simon Armitage does very much go down the Achilles and Patroclus as cousins route, kind of like the movie Troy, though the rumours about Achilles and Patroclus are definitely referenced in here. But yeah, I think if you are a fan of ancient Greek myth retelling, then this is definitely one to put under your belt, to get under your belt. I'd have loved to have seen this performed. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Simon Armitage does with Odysseus. As we know, I love Odysseus. He is my favourite Greek hero, the better or for worse. And I really like how he played with his character in this. So yeah, looking forward to that. I actually read 3 different things on the ancient myth train, or at least ancient history train, because I also read The Ancient Guide to Modern Life by Natalie Haynes. This was one of the books that was actually on my 2022 TBR, where I got a bunch of my favourite booktubers to react to what I had on my TBR because I was ill at the time. And I think it was Anna who I gave this book to react to. And yeah, this seems to be one of Natalie Haynes's books that kind of slips under the radar. Not many people know about this, I think because it came out before Pandora's Jar and before 1,000 Ships. But yeah, this is one of her first books. It is non-fiction history, talking basically about ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and different philosophies for life, things that we do in our current life in terms of politics, in terms of business, finance, religion, and how much we can trace back to ancient world, which is a lot of it. Lessons that we can take from ancient history into our own modern life, and maybe things that we've forgotten. And yeah, the premise of that sounded really, really interesting. Personally, I would say this is probably my least favourite Natalie Haynes book that I've read so far. I didn't always find the structure of this to make a whole lot of sense, and I felt like she kind of jumped from topic to topic quite quickly without much rhyme or reason. I didn't feel like I was always following her arguments. I felt like she would sometimes fall down little rabbit holes that I don't know how she got herself out of them. She just kind of very quickly brushed it off and then moved on to the next topic. So I didn't really love the flow of this. You know, I think the main thesis, the main arguments in here are interesting and compelling. I just didn't always love the execution of this, which is a shame because I do like Natalie Haynes, but I got this from a charity shop and apparently signed by the author. Very nice to have. The last Ancients inspired book that I read this month was Gaia, Goddess of the Earth by Imogen and Isabel Greenberg. This is, I believe, intended for children, though who knows really when it comes to ancient myth. A beautifully illustrated little graphic novel picture book all about Gaia, who is quite an underrated goddess, I think, and one of the OGs really. Last year I read their take on Athena, and I will say I did kind of prefer Athena to this. I don't know if it's just because Athena is probably one of my favourites, if not my favourite goddess. I really liked them telling this story of Gaia being very underappreciated, how her advice is not heeded, but because of that it feels much less like a story about Gaia and her actions as much as it is the other gods just not really listening to her and doing their own thing, which is all part of the story, you know, but it meant that you don't feel quite as much of a connection to her as you did with Athena, who is like very much a present person in her own narrative. I did see a few people talking about how some of the mythology in here is a little bit weak. Some of the things that are mentioned are not quite true. I feel like I don't know enough about like the god mythology to really verify that. There are especially things in here to do with Heracles that I was like, huh, I didn't really know that, which made me think, is this actually true to the mythology? So yeah, for me, this is beautiful. If you are a completionist of Greek myth, of Imogen and Isabel Greenberg's works, then definitely pick this up. I just personally preferred Athena. And then finally, the last thing that I've read recently is Bargain Bin Rom-Com, which is a poetry collection by BookTube's very own Leena. This is one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and as you can see from all of the dog earing, all of the tapping that I have done, I really, really enjoyed this. If you've ever watched any of Leena's videos, you know that she has this very trademark wit and sense of humour, and this is definitely reflected here. I've heard Leena read out quite a few of these poems, so there's part of me that thought, oh, is it just going to feel like I've already been through this, that it feels a bit stale, but absolutely not. Every time I read some of these, it feels like the first time, and it feels really fresh and new. A lot of like taking everyday things and just making it more remarkable with the way that she sees it, with her point of view. Poems in here about love, about living in a modern age, about the climate crisis, about how we relate to other people and the things that we let other people get away with, the things that we do on behalf of others, the way that we treat people around us. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. I think I will just basically eat up any poetry that Leena offers us from now on. Definitely one to add to your wish list. So there we go, those are all of the books that I have read most recently. Do let me know if you've read anything that I've spoken about today. Alternatively, let me know about anything that you've been reading recently that you think I would enjoy. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day. I hope you are not boiling in this heat. I mean, by the time that this video goes out, it'll probably be freezing. Anyway, I hope you're all doing really well, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.